What if you could step back into the 60s when every corner of a black home held something strangely unforgettable, something you didn't even realize was bizarre until the world changed around you? Well, that's what we're doing today. Let's start with the one you probably still joke about. You remember those plastic-covered couches, don't you? You'd walk into somebody's living room, the good living room, and the first thing you'd hear was that sharp crinkle under your thigh when you tried to sit. The vinyl was thick, shiny, and slightly yellowed around the edges from years of sunlight. In the summer, it grabbed the back of your legs like it had a personal vendetta. You could feel the heat trapped underneath it, like it had been storing every warm day since 1958. There was always this faint smell too, warm plastic mixed with furniture polish, and maybe the hint of whatever cologne your uncle wore to church that morning. The reason it existed was simple. That furniture was an achievement. Those couches weren't just couches, they were proof. Proof you'd made it far enough to buy something new. Proof you could take care of what you earned. Proof you had a space worthy of company, so the covers were a shield against kids, against spills, against life. But now, nobody is wrapping their sectional in thick vinyl anymore. Most people don't even buy fabric that needs protecting. And when you look around your living room today, the softness, the breathability, the comfort, you ever miss that plasticky squeak? Or was it one of those things you're secretly glad didn't follow us into the future? And right near that living room, usually mounted on the wall between the kitchen and the hallway, there it was, the rotary phone with the long tangled cord. You remember the sound, those slow clicking gears as the dial spun back into place. Each number felt like a commitment. You couldn't rush it, even if you wanted to. There was always that slight hum in the background, and, if you were unlucky, a neighbor's voice bleeding through because your family shared a party line. Picture it. Someone calling from 3 states away, each minute costing real money, and you standing in that kitchen twisting the cord around your finger, hoping nobody picked up another receiver and yelled, "Hang up that line." The context made the phone feel bigger than it really was. It was a lifeline, especially for families spread between the South and the North during the Great Migration. It carried news, big decisions, emergencies, hopes. Today, everything is instant, pocket-sized, cordless. You can talk to someone without even talking, but when you think back to the weight of that handset and the shape it left in your palm, doesn't a part of you miss the slowness, the intention? Or do you remember how your finger used to slip while dialing a 9 and you'd have to start all over again? Now, step back into that house a little further and tell me you don't remember the formal dining room, the one nobody was allowed to enter unless it was Thanksgiving, Christmas, or somebody graduated. Everything was polished, the thick tablecloth, the chairs with carved wooden backs, the soft smell of lemon oil rising every time a piece of furniture was wiped down. The room stayed mostly dark, curtains pulled, because sunlight was the enemy of nice things. You'd walk past that room all year long, staring at it like a museum exhibit, waiting for the moment you were finally allowed to sit there. In the 60s, that room meant something. It was where the family came together looking sharp, eating food prepared with love and intention, celebrating moments that felt bigger than the house itself. And today, open floor plans swallowed those rooms whole. More casual meals, more counters than tables. But think about it. You ever wish you still had a room that felt like ceremony? A room that made dinner feel like an event? And right in that same dining room, or sometimes in the hallway, stood that towering wooden console stereo system. You remember the feel of the wood, heavy, ornate, smooth as glass. You'd lift the lid, and inside was a world. The record player, the radio tuner, maybe a place to store vinyl. When the needle dropped, the speakers didn't just play music, they filled the whole house. You felt the bass from the Temptations in your chest. You smelled the warm electronics when the tubes heated up. And on Sunday mornings, gospel shook the walls before you even opened your eyes. Those consoles mattered because music mattered. It didn't just entertain, it unified, it soothed, it uplifted. It acted as a soundtrack to resilience. Today, everything is portable, wireless, compressed, louder maybe, but not deeper. You ever hear a modern speaker and think, it just don't hit the same? Now move your eyes just a few feet away, usually against the back wall or near the entryway, and you'd see the china cabinet, glass doors, delicate shelves, plates so fine you were scared to breathe near them. They weren't used, they weren't touched, they were displayed because those dishes were heirlooms, gifts from weddings, hand-me-downs from grandmothers, symbols of stability that families held on to tightly. You'd open the doors occasionally, and there was this faint mix of wood, dust, and dish soap that lingered from the last careful cleaning. Today, those cabinets are almost extinct. People want open shelves, minimalism, clutter-free living, but sometimes don't you miss the drama of a whole cabinet dedicated to things nobody could actually use? Didn't it feel like proof that your family came from somewhere, even if you didn't have the words for that feeling yet? Alright, one more before we catch our breath. Think back to those old wooden TV cabinets, the ones with the doors you could close when the television wasn't supposed to be on. The screen was small, the box was enormous, and the sound was never quite loud enough unless someone yelled at the kids to stop making noise. The cabinet itself was furniture, with a shine that had to be maintained. Sometimes it doubled as a surface for photos, doilies, or tiny figurines. Turning it on meant waiting for that warm-up glow, the slight buzz of the tubes coming alive. Back then, hiding the TV wasn't strange. It was intentional. It kept the house looking dignified, controlled, presentable. Today, TVs are practically billboards hanging on walls, always visible, always glowing. But when you think about those cabinet doors closing for the night, doesn't it bring back the quiet, the sense that the day was officially over? And if you're seeing that wooden TV cabinet in your mind, then you probably remember what sat on top of it too. Those stiff, intricately patterned doilies your grandmother starched within an inch of their lives. You know the ones. They looked delicate, but they were as rigid as thin cardboard because someone spent half an afternoon pressing them flat. You'd run your fingers across the lace and feel every loop, every tiny knot. They never slid out of place because starch made them stick to the wood like a decal. Those doilies weren't just decoration, they were protection. Tiny shields against scratches, heat, and the possibility of furniture getting ruined. Back then, your grandmother didn't have extra money to replace things. What she had, she preserved meticulously. Today, most people don't even use coasters, let alone lace armor for their furniture. But don't you sometimes miss that sense of care? That idea that everything, every object, every corner deserved intention? Right next to those doilies, or maybe on a small shelf in the hallway, you'd often see an entire set of encyclopedias. Thick, leather-textured spines with gold-stamped lettering. They smelled like old paper and ink, the kind of smell that made you feel smarter just by opening a volume. You'd flip through a page and hear that crisp, dry crackle, like the book was waking up after being closed for too long. For a lot of black families in the 60s, those encyclopedias were more than books. They were aspiration. They were an education you could touch. Parents bought them piece by piece, sometimes paying on installment plans because having them meant their children had access to the information they themselves rarely did. They sat proudly in living rooms like trophies. But today, a whole world of knowledge sits in your pocket, instant, infinite, and yet, when's the last time you opened something and felt the weight of learning the way you did flipping through those thick, dusty pages? Now let's step into the kitchen, because this is where some of the most unforgettable features live. You remember the breakfast nook, right? A little built-in bench tucked into a corner, cushions slightly worn, the tabletop always cool to the touch. Mornings there were soft and slow. You could smell eggs frying, biscuits warming, maybe the lingering scent of last night's cornbread still hanging in the air. That nook wasn't fancy, it wasn't big, but it forced closeness. Knees knocking under the table, shoulders brushing, quiet moments before everybody split off into the world. Today, kitchens are sprawling, open, full of islands and bar stools. But isn't there something you miss about squeezing into that tiny corner, half asleep, listening to the soft rumble of the refrigerator while someone you loved moved around the stove? And in that very same kitchen was a built-in ironing board, folded neatly inside the wall like a secret. You'd pull open that slim, creaking door, tug the board down, and hear the metal hinge snap into place. The wood behind it always smelled old, like the house had been storing decades of heat and steam inside that little cavity. You could hear the rhythmic whoosh of an iron gliding back and forth in the early morning as shirts were pressed for work, for school, for Sunday service. Sharp creases weren't just fashion, they were respectability. They were pride. They were armor against a world that judged you before you spoke. Now steamers, wrinkle sprays, and throw it in the dryer for 10 minutes have replaced the ritual. But doesn't the memory of that ironing board bring back the sound of your mother or grandmother humming softly while preparing everyone for the day? Walk out of the kitchen and sink your toes into the next memory. Wall-to-wall shag carpeting, thick plush. So deep your foot disappeared into it like fresh snow. It held warmth, smells, crumbs, secrets. You had to rake it. Yes, rake it. Because a vacuum could only do so much. It came in colors no one dares use today. Burnt orange, mustard yellow, avocado green. When sunlight hit it just right, it looked like waves. In the 60s, shag carpeting felt luxurious, soft, modern. In Black homes, it softened the edges of long days. It made the living room feel like a place to rest. Today, most people prefer hardwood or vinyl, easy to clean, cool underfoot. But think about that feeling of sinking into a carpet so thick it felt alive. You ever miss that softness or the way it made the whole house feel insulated from the world? Move down the hall a bit further, and you might remember the phone table with the attached seat. A single compact unit, half furniture, half communication center. The seat was usually firm, covered in vinyl or scratchy upholstery. The little drawer stored address books, church directories, maybe a notepad for taking messages. The phone sat on top, and the long cord dangled like a vine. That table mattered because calls mattered. You didn't stroll around the house while talking. You sat. You stayed in one place. You focused. Today, nobody has a phone spot. Everything moves with us. But don't you remember sitting at that table, twirling the cord, listening for that distant click that meant someone on the other end finally answered? Now step into the kitchen again, or at least look up at the wall, because here's another detail: the wooden spice rack. Rows of jars with handwritten labels or tiny printed ones, each filled with colors that told you exactly what kind of cooking was happening in that home. Paprika dust clinging to the glass, dried thyme that smelled like Sunday, the sharp, earthy punch of black pepper that lingered in the air even after the lid was closed. Every jar had a role. Every jar was used. In Black homes, those spices weren't just seasoning, they were memory. Grandma's recipe, Auntie's trick, a smell that meant comfort. Today, spices hide in cabinets or drawers, out of sight. But don't you remember the pride of seeing that full rack? Knowing every flavor had a story? Step outside the kitchen and bend toward the wall panel near the side door. A metal flap that clinks softly when you tap it. The milk delivery chute. Run your fingers along its edges. Feel the slight give of the hinges worn smooth by years of use. It opened to the outside, where a milkman would place fresh glass bottles in the morning before most of the house stirred awake. You could hear them lightly clink together if you woke early enough. That gentle collision of glass on glass, then the soft thud of the outer door closing. Inside, the cool air from the chute made the little compartment feel like a tiny refrigerator, the metal walls sweating faintly in summer, holding in that cellar-like chill. The bottles themselves had weight and substance. Cream rose to the top in a thick, yellowish layer you had to shake back into the milk. Sometimes there was buttermilk or chocolate milk as a weekend treat. The empties went back out, rinsed, returned, reused, nothing wasted. For Black families in the 1960s, getting milk delivered felt like a small luxury, a service that came to you, a convenience in neighborhoods where grocery stores were often scarce, poorly stocked, or miles away. Redlining and disinvestment meant fewer options, so reliable delivery mattered. The milkman knew your order, sometimes knew your name. There was dignity in being served and having something arrive fresh at your door like it did in any other neighborhood. Today, delivery feels modern and tech-driven. Apps, tracking numbers, boxes left on porches. But those early services had a quiet human rhythm. The same truck on the same morning, the same hands setting down the bottles. Do you remember the small excitement of finding new bottles waiting in that cold little alcove? The satisfaction of pulling them out, still cool to the touch, knowing breakfast was ready? And before we step further into the house, pause at the front porch, the swing, wooden slats worn smooth in the places where bodies sat most often. Slightly rusted chains that left orange dust on your palms if you gripped them too tightly. The soft, uneven rhythm of the seat swaying back and forth, that familiar creak and groan as it moved. Evenings on that swing were slow, warm, alive with the sounds of cicadas, pulsing in the trees, the occasional car passing with its windows down, music drifting out and fading. The light would go golden, then pink, then dim. Conversations drifted easily there, nothing urgent, nothing rushed. Talk about work, about someone's cousin visiting from up north, about the garden, about nothing at all. Neighbors stopped by, leaned on the railing, stayed longer than they meant to. Children chased each other in the yard, caught lightning bugs in jars, while adults watched and talked about the day, about the news, about tomorrow. The porch was where you learned things without realizing you were learning, where you heard stories repeated until they became part of you, where older folks sat with glasses of sweet tea and watched the street like they were keeping watch over something important, because they were. It was an extension of the home, yes, but also a bridge to the community, a place of safety, a place where you were seen and known. Today, most people stay inside with air conditioning and streaming services. Blinds drawn against the heat, porches sit empty. Neighbors pass without stopping. The rhythms have changed. But isn't there something in you that misses the breeze on your face, the creak of the swing, the feeling that you could sit there forever? Let's step back inside now and pause in the entryway. You remember how it felt to walk into a house with a formal hall, right? A place to hang coats, a mirror to check your appearance, a small table holding keys or a bowl of mints. It created a buffer between outside and inside. Crossing that threshold felt like exhaling. Black homes in the 60s treated the entryway like a welcome statement, organized, intentional, sacred. Today, most homes jump straight into the living room. No transition, no pause. But don't you miss that moment of stepping in and feeling the world fall away? And if you're standing in that entryway long enough, your eyes drift toward the hallway closet, the linen closet. You remember opening that door and being hit with a wave of scented perfection. Fresh detergent, lavender sachets, maybe even a hint of mothballs hiding in the back. The towels were stacked in perfect color-coordinated towers. Washcloths folded precisely, sheets pressed, smoothed, and tucked tightly into place. Everything matched. Matching colors, matching patterns, matching vibes. And you knew better than to touch anything unless you were told. In the 60s, a well-stocked linen closet meant preparedness, stability. It meant a home that functioned with order even when the world outside didn't. Families took pride in having good towels for guests and everyday towels for the house. Today, towels get tossed into random drawers, mixed and mismatched, lost to time and laundry cycles. But do you remember the satisfaction of opening that closet and seeing everything lined up like a tiny department store shelf? Now, follow that hallway back to the kitchen wall, and you might remember the old wall-mounted can opener. The metal crank, the way it clicked rhythmically as you turned it, the sharp snip when the can finally opened. It was bolted into one spot, unchanging, immovable. It didn't get misplaced, it didn't need batteries. It was just there, solid. Why did it matter so much? Because families relied on cans, vegetables, fruit, condensed milk. That opener was a workhorse, part of the rhythm of feeding a family on a budget. Today, we've got electric openers, sleek handheld ones, or canned foods with pull-tab lids. But don't you miss that satisfying metal grind, that feeling of doing something simple, manual, and real? Step past the can opener and look toward the wall that opened into the dining room, the pass-through window. You remember that little cutout square? It let the cook slide plates, pots, or bowls straight through without walking around. You could smell food drifting through that opening long before dinner was ready. Fried chicken popping in the oil, collard greens simmering low and slow, cornbread warming in the oven. In the 60s, that window kept everyone connected. You could talk to the cook while sitting at the table. You could peek your head through and ask, how much longer? Today, open floor plans swallowed those windows whole. The entire wall is gone. But wasn't there something magical about that tiny square? The anticipation of seeing a plate appear through it like a surprise? Now duck your head into one of the most overlooked but deeply important rooms in a 60s home, the sewing room. You know the space. A humming sewing machine, a basket full of thread spools, newspaper patterns pinned to fabric, the sharp smell of scissors slicing through cloth. For many Black families, sewing wasn't a hobby, it was necessity. You made clothes last, you made dresses from scratch, you hemmed, patched, altered, saved money wherever you could. That room was a factory of love and labor. Today, fast fashion makes everything disposable. Clothes aren't repaired, they're replaced. But don't you remember watching fabric glide under that needle, the soft thump 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 of the machine stitching your world together? Now we're heading down into the basement, where some of the most rugged memories live. You remember the coal or wood cellar. The air down there was damp, cool, and dense. You could smell earth, old stone, maybe a hint of soot from decades of burning fuel. Bags or piles of coal sat against the wall, each piece dusty and sharp. Firewood stacked high, seasoned by time. Carrying that coal shovel or armful of logs up the stairs was an entire workout, a chore you never quite got used to. For families in the 60s, heating wasn't automatic, it was physical. It demanded effort. Survival meant planning ahead, stocking up before winter, rationing during cold spells. Today, heat flows with a switch, effortless, invisible. But don't you remember the glow of that furnace or stove, the warmth earned, not given? Now, before we head back upstairs, picture the screened-in back porch. You hear it before you see it, the soft buzz of cicadas, the rustle of leaves, the gentle scrape of metal springs under your chair. The screens let in every breeze but kept out every mosquito, making making it the perfect hybrid space between indoors and outdoors. You'd sit out there on warm nights listening to the distant laughter from neighbors, the hum of the radio from inside, and the slow settling of the house as the sun went down. That porch was freedom without stepping into the yard, safety without walls, a place where people talked late into the night. Today, people close those spaces in with glass, or they disappear entirely into back decks and patios. But don't you miss that warm, screened glow. Now step into the cool, dim corner of the basement again, the root cellar, shelves lined with jars, peaches, okra, pickled onions, chow, preserves so deeply colored they looked like stained glass when light hit them. The air was earthy, cold, and still. Those jars represented preparation, protection against scarcity. In the 60s, these cellars mattered because food security wasn't guaranteed. Storing what you grew or bought cheap was wisdom passed down from generations. Today, refrigerators and grocery stores make it unnecessary, but don't those jars still glimmer in your memory? The pride of pulling out something homemade. Now walk outside into the backyard. Look at the clothesline, 2 wooden posts, a line stretched tight, clothespins clipped like tiny soldiers, fresh laundry hanging in the sun, sheets flapping in the wind, shirts dancing on the breeze. There was nothing like the smell. Sun-warmed cotton, fresh air, a hint of soap. Drying clothes outside was ritual. It was economy. It was art. You learned how to pin things so they wouldn't blow away. You learned the order, towels first, then shirts, then underwear on the inside so people couldn't see. Today, dryers do the job silently. But tell me, does anything smell cleaner than a sheet that dried in open air? And finally, look at the windows, those old storm windows and screens. Every year, like clockwork, the whole family worked together to swap them out. Screws loosened, frames lifted, dust flew, cold hands pressed metal into place. It was a seasonal ritual, fall bringing in the glass, spring bringing back the screens. You could hear the change of seasons in the clatter of those frames. Today, windows are insulated, weatherproof, convenient, no swaps needed. But don't you remember the teamwork, the laughter, the complaining, the satisfaction when the last screw tightened? So now you've walked through the house, not just any house, your grandmother's house, your auntie's house, the house you can still navigate even with your eyes closed. And somewhere in all those memories, you probably felt something you didn't expect, the quiet truth that even the strangest, most bizarre features weren't strange at all back then. They were normal, universal, a part of daily life. They shaped the rhythm of your childhood in ways you didn't recognize until they were gone. Because the thing about Black homes in the 60s is that they weren't just places to sleep. They were fortresses, cultural hubs, safe spaces built through resourcefulness, tradition, and pride, especially during a decade when the world outside the front door was uncertain, changing, and often hostile. Every object had purpose. Every smell had a story. Every routine was a ritual. And when you think about it now, the plastic couches, the rotary phones, the formal dining rooms, the console stereos, the doilies, the encyclopedias, the breakfast nooks, the ironing boards, the shag carpeting, the phone tables, the spice racks, the milk chutes, the porch swings, the entry halls, the linen closets, the built-in openers, the pass-through windows, the sewing rooms, the coal cellars, the screened porches, the root cellars, the clotheslines, the storm windows, you realize something incredibly simple. These weren't just features. They were fingerprints. They were proof of who we came from. They remind you of hands that cleaned, built, preserved, repaired, cooked, folded, ironed, stitched, scrubbed, and protected. Hands that made sure the home stayed a sanctuary. Hands that held a family together through whatever the world was throwing their way. And maybe that's the real nostalgia. Not the objects themselves, but the people behind them, the atmosphere they created, the love they projected, the ways they made the home feel full even when life outside felt empty or unpredictable. You think about those long cords on the phones and remember the conversations that stretched late into the night. You think about the console stereo and remember music that lifted spirits. You think about the spice rack and remember flavors that traveled through generations. You think about the sewing room and remember clothes that held you together when money couldn't. You think about the porch swing and remember stories told softly, laughter floating into the warm air. You think about the root cellar and remember the taste of summer's preserve for winter. And somewhere inside you, you feel that gentle tug, the one that pulls you back to the simplest version of home, the version built from resilience and routine, the version held together by tradition and tenderness. Now here's the part I want to ask you directly, because nostalgia isn't just remembering, it's connecting. Which one of these features hit you the hardest? Which one made you pause and say, Lord, I remember that? Which one made you smile? Which one made you hear a voice, smell a smell, or feel a moment you haven't thought about in years? Drop it in the comments. Share your memories. Share the details only you remember, because someone else is going to read it and instantly smell their grandmother's cornbread, or hear their uncle's stereo, or picture that plastic couch shining under a lamp. And while you're here, if this walk through the past sparked something in you, go ahead and like the video. Subscribe if you want more journeys like this. We've got stories to tell, rooms to revisit, and memories waiting in every corner. Thanks for walking with me. Now it's your turn to step in and bring the next memory to life.